Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to pay our respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. Hey everyone, and welcome to All Together, the Family Science Insights podcast, produced by Ellen Massell, the Life Management Science Labs. We are champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element, with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I'm your host, Dina Sargent. Let's get started.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to the show. I'm Gabriella. I'm stepping in for Dina this week, and I'm very excited to be talking to Kelly Chandler about how work-family conflict affects family relationships and family members. So Kelly is an associate professor in the School of Human Development and Family Sciences in the College of Health at Oregon State University. Hi, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thank you. Before we get started on this very interesting topic, do you mind introducing yourself in a bit more detail so we get to know a bit more about who you are and why you're here today?
Sure. As you said, I'm an associate professor here in Human Development and Family Sciences. I teach the undergrad and graduate family classes here, family studies and family theories. So I'm a family scientist through and through. But I also really am fascinated by the work context, what happens at work and how it shapes family life and vice versa. I got my Ph.D. in Human Development and Family Studies at Penn State University and worked with Nan Crowder, who really inspired me and taught me so much about the work-family interface. I have two daughters. I have a 19-year-old and a 13-year-old. So, sometimes people say research is me-search. So learning how to manage work and family and trying to see what are some options and how to minimize this work-family conflict, I think about a lot. So that's just a little bit about me. I love reading and watching movies and going for runs and sports with my girls.
Okay, great. And that actually leads us perfectly into our next section, which is called Have You Met Kelly? And that's where I ask some of your favorite things. So what is your favorite book, or can you not pick one?
I can't pick one, but I did just recently read Cultish by Amanda Montell, which is a fascinating book where she looks at language used in high control groups, such as cults. I'm fascinated with cults and especially the family dynamics within cults. So if you want to interview me again about that, I'd be happy to do that.
Great. I'll put that down. Yeah. So do you mind explaining some of the family or the dynamics that are within a cult, or we'll save it for next time?
Probably save it for next time, but just so many interesting dynamics in terms of, gender within the family, thinking about gender roles, parenting practices, the enmeshment in family. So there's a lot there. So it's been really exciting learning more about that and developing a course on that. So
interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. This is not my normal podcast. I usually do one about home organization and household management. So very different from this area. So maybe Dina will bring me back on for that episode, hopefully.
Good.
But what about for a movie? Do you have a favorite movie?
So it is a 1989 movie. I believe it's 89, but it's called The Burbs with Tom Hanks. It is my go-to movie if I'm stressed out and want to laugh. And it's something that my sister and I bond over. So if you haven't seen it, I recommend The Burbs.
What's it about?
It's this funny situation where it's a neighborhood in the burbs, the suburbs, and they have new neighbors that come in that they suspect might be up to no good. And so then there's just all this mayhem trying to figure out whether or not they are good guys or bad guys.
Mm-hmm. So it's a comedy?
It's a comedy, yes. And Tom Hanks is amazing in it, yeah.
All right. Yeah, I haven't seen many Tom Hanks movies, so I'll have to check that out. And do you have a podcast that you like listening to?
My favorite podcast right now is called Ono, Ross, and Carrie.
Mm-hmm.
So you're going to notice a theme here. So Ross and Carrie, the podcasters, they go to explore, investigate cults and share their experiences. And they are so witty and captivating. It's really interesting. So, they go and learn about different cults and, things of the paranormal and pseudoscience, tell us what they've learned and sort of their experiences with it. So it's really interesting. So you could tell I'm really fascinated by cults.
I mean, honestly, like cults are something I think a lot of people are interested in. And I think they're just these fascinating structures because on the one hand, we're like, oh, that'll never happen to me. And then everyone I think who is in a cult thinks that. And so we're always like, oh, could it be me? And I think that's why.
Exactly.
Okay. And hopefully your famous role model isn't a cult leader.
I would understand if you were concerned if it was. No, and this may seem like a cliche role model, but Michelle Obama, I think she is just the epitome of character and just the way she exemplified being a supportive and caring mother and partner while also being a successful attorney and first lady, and really championing a Fair Pay Act here in the U.S., and just so many different things. But I just really find her inspiring. And my children who are Black, white, biracial really look to her as well. So it kind of gives that extra meaning of, a Black successful woman who has strong values and cares about family.
Mm. I mean, I can see how people really find and how you find her very, very much a role model. I think being an Australian, I haven't had as much influence from her, I guess, because, she's not in our news every day. But yeah,
Right.
from what I've seen, she's, certainly a very strong role model. So thank you for sharing that.
Mm-hmm.
And have you completed any courses recently that you really enjoyed?
I recently took a class called Remind Me Your Pronouns. So it's knowledge and skills for LGBTQ advocacy. So that was something I took here at Oregon State, and I try to take social justice, equity, inclusion courses. So that was the last class that I took. So I found that really beneficial.
Interesting. Can you share anything you learned from that?
Yeah, it was just, sort of starting with the basics of, recognizing, really seeing people and starting with asking their pronouns rather than assuming them. And just how that practice may seem so simple can really make someone feel like they belong and they can be their authentic selves. Of course, that's not everything. And then recognizing that, if you make a mistake, and misgender someone, to correct it. And for me, it's really about this process and humbling myself and learning new things for advocacy, not just with the LGBTQ plus community, but also in terms of racial justice and how can I be a true ally. And so learning these things from the very beginning to be welcoming and hopefully people feel like they belong and are safe when they're talking with me.
Mm. Yes, I think that that's something that a lot of people are trying to learn and I think need to learn, but I also don't think it's necessarily, I think it's something that we have to continually learn. It's not something that's ever going to end, really. So it's great to see that you're continuing your education and I'm trying to continue as well with that. And it'll be interesting, I think, if it does come up in our interview. I'm not sure if it will, but yeah, that'd be interesting to see if it does come up today. So getting into our interview now, into our main topic, I like to start with a few definitions to sort of get us off started on the right platform so we know what we're talking about. So the first thing that I'd like to know is, what do you think a family is?
That's a great question. I actually spent the first week of my undergrad family studies class talking about that and the many different ways that family is defined and what the implications are for that. So talking about the family as an institution, what is the family's role in society, the legal definition of family, right, in terms of benefits, and then also the personal family. And with the increasing complexity in families, trying to find a definition that's inclusive of all families can be challenging, and not all those definitions fit. One option is looking at two or more people bound together by biology, law, or an emotional connection. And so I really like that because it does open it up to being more inclusive of families. Because there's often this default of this nostalgic idea of a family, of, white, middle class, two parents, two children, intact heterosexual families. And so that's really problematic. So the idea is to try to think about all the different types of families and how can we be inclusive of them. And to also recognize that there is this thing called family privilege. Back to what I was just saying, talking about sort of when the idealized image of a family, well, those are the families that have really been in the spotlight with research and policy and practice, right? And so broadening the definition of family can then put a spotlight on other families, such as LGBTQ plus families, families of color, that really need more attention in the research as well as policy and practice. So,
I know that with science there has been a focus, I guess, on a certain type of person. I think that they are male, middle-aged white men. And it's interesting to see that sort of same bias has come into family research as well. I hadn't really thought about that. Yeah. So, and you also mentioned as well that the way that the family interacts with, I guess, society. So how does that interact? Because, yeah, I'd love to know.
right. Yeah. So for the family as an institution, it's what are those responsibilities of the family to make society run smoothly? So that would be meeting basic needs, as well as socializing children. So procreating and having children and raising them to be productive members of society. So those are some examples of the role of family in society.
But can you have a family without children?
You can, which is a great question. But with that definition, a lot of the focus is on how do we sustain society, right? And so procreating and socializing and moving forward. But certainly using an inclusive definition, there doesn't need to be children there.
Okay.
Now, I will say with my own personal life and the research that I do, I often default to parents with kids. So I put my bias out there, but certainly family does not have to involve kids.
Mm-hmm. And I guess what we're going to be talking about today, which is the work-family conflict or work-family balance, probably affects, families with children more than, say, families without children. Maybe not necessarily. So maybe we can set off and say we're probably going to be talking mainly about families with children.
I think that's fair. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, great. And actually, so on that note, what is the work-family conflict or work-family balance?
Thank you. Yeah. So in the work-family research, there are a lot of definitions and names of the relationship between work and family, work-family enrichment, spillover, integration, and so forth. Certainly, there are positive relationships between work and family experiences. And I do study that some, but a lot of my research focuses on work-family conflict. And essentially what that means is when the roles and responsibilities that you have at work and family are incompatible in some way. I always use the metaphor of a rope. So you're playing tug of war, And so your work is demanding time, but your family is also demanding time. And so then there's that conflict. You can only be in one place at one time or be doing one thing at one time. And there's also strain-based conflict. So you were up all night with a baby and you're just so exhausted. So then when you go to work, you may not have the energy and the focus. So it does go both ways. When you mentioned balance, I've really moved away from this term, work-family balance or work-life balance. And other work-family scholars have too, and I'll tell you why. For me, I've always found it just so abstract. I see it on these magazines and hear about it. It's like, everyone can have work-family balance and that sort of thing. And I'll often ask students and others, like, how do you define it? And there's so many definitions of balance. And to me, it's just really abstract. And when you see images, when people are talking about balance, it'll be like, pebbles on top of one another, or the famous one is having scales and they're completely balanced. But is it fair, even accurate to say that you're going to be spending equal amounts of time in work and family, equal involvement, equal satisfaction? And so for me, it sets up this false sort of goal or expectation. So you're not going to meet it. Instead of balance, I like the term work-family fit. And that's different because it becomes more concrete. So it's looking at how congruent are your work and family roles. Do you have the abilities, skills, energy to meet the demands? And do you have the resources that are going to meet your needs? And so then you can get into very specific, like, okay, you have the supervisor support that you need to meet, this specific need. You have schedule control to meet, So for me, that seems to be more realistic and concrete. I know we're focusing on conflict today, but I think it's important I'm a big stickler with terms. My students know this because the terms we use and how we define them are so important for how we research and how we set up expectations in our lives. And so we want to set ourselves up for success. And so making sure that something's attainable and concrete is really important from my perspective.
Thank you. That certainly clears up a lot of things that I was wondering, because like I can Google something, but it's not necessarily what is actually being used in research. And I think that, as you said, it can be very important to define terms and actually know what you're talking about, because you can't measure something if you don't know what you're measuring.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And if you don't know what you're measuring, then how can you make an impact, to improve work-family balance? It's not going to happen. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You can balance something by adding things on both sides, but it's you can't actually do that in real life because you're just going to be crushed.
Right. Exactly.
So you're mentioning, so we're going to be talking about work-family conflict today. So how does that, can you explain a little bit more about how work and family, how they can conflict with each other? You mentioned a little bit about time and strain, but how do they interact?
So there's been a lot of research looking at, what are work conditions, what's on the work side that can create conflict, and what is on the family side that can increase the risk of work-family conflict. On the work side, it can be long work hours or thinking about, shift work, non-standard work schedules that don't align with spending time with your family, whether it's kids' schedules or maybe it's, taking an aging parent to a health appointment. It could be the just physical aspects of the job that are really exhausting. So when you come home, not having like the energy maybe to keep up with spending time, or just really emotionally draining and then not being, psychologically available at home. Family, right? Depending on the age of children, how many family members, what their needs are, basically the more caregiving responsibilities that you have can make it more challenging. to have the energy at work. But certainly possible, right? But having the right resources to manage those. And certainly if there's a crisis going on at home, or maybe, a partner changes a job or loses a job, all of those things can go back and forth and conflict with, finances, time, having energy, being physically and psychologically present. And also things like having a partner who can help with, parenting, tag team parenting, and having another person, or maybe it's a parent that's living with you, to have like a backup for childcare, which can definitely be challenging. So those are some ways where they can kind of increase the likelihood of work-family conflict.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And it does seem like, as you were saying, like with balance, it seems to be changing a lot, between, maybe work schedules change, someone leaves, you take on more responsibility, or kids, kids getting sick, kids getting older, having different after school activities. It seems like the work-life balance would be changing constantly. So yeah, maybe a work fit is, or work family fit is a better term. But yeah, and it seems hard to, I guess, manage them. I don't know how parents do it.
Well, actually, could I interrupt just for a second? Because
Yeah.
you raised an excellent point in that things are always changing, whether it's balance or conflict, right? So, just thinking developmentally, where your family is, where your kids are, and what their needs are, but also looking even within a week and how your different needs can change. So I've started looking at work-family conflict on a daily level. So when you experience like the work responsibilities you have, interfere with being able to fulfill family responsibilities or spend time with your family, even within a week, you can see fluctuations with that. So I think that's a really important point in terms of trying to understand the effects of work-family conflict on families, is really looking at how it changes over time. So I just wanted to add to that because it made me think of, sometimes or oftentimes we talk about work and family and finding balance or fit. Well, it might be at that particular time in your life, given your family situation, your work situation, but things are constantly changing, even within a given day. You might experience a conflict and then something positive happens, so, life is dynamic. And so being able to measure that and study that really gives us insight into the lived experiences of parents who are working, or adults who are working that have family relationships.
So you mentioned a bit before about how the work-family conflict affects family members. So do you mind elaborating a bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So first, I just want to recognize that work-family conflict is a really potent stressor. There's been decades of research, at least for the individual, that shows the more work-family conflict you have, the poorer physical health and mental health you have. And it's even been linked to mortality. So we'll see a lot of surveys and news about work stress. But I think it's important to isolate or look specifically at work-family conflict because it really does have detrimental effects on the individual. And if you take a family systems approach, the worker is in a family and you have the other partner. So anything that happens to that worker at the workplace is going to affect everyone else. So if they've had a stressful day at work, they may come home and be really irritable. And so then that causes some conflict, let's say with the partner or with the kids. Or maybe they're just had a physically exhausting day. They come home and they just withdraw from, let's say, a family meal or a family activity, which could make other family members sad or feel disconnected. And the stress and emotional transmission can occur where stress from that conflict that the parent is experiencing, kids pick up on that, the partner picks up on that, whether it's directly or indirectly, and then that could be related to their health and well-being as well. And there's research, especially looking at the effects of work-family conflict on kids. It's a small but growing area of research. So there is support for showing how work-family conflict can affect kids' daily affect and their health.
Mm-hmm. And so if you are experiencing some work-family conflict, what kinds of things can you do to maybe try to reduce some of the effect? Is it just, quitting your job and spending more time with family, losing the family and spending more time on work?
Right. Now that's a very complicated question, but it's an important one, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, one is thinking about your identity and which roles are most salient or important for you. So if family is more important and you have the privilege of being able to reduce hours, that might be a way to manage work-family conflict. Of course, not all of us have the privilege of reducing hours or shifting hours. But it really takes a multi-systems approach for there to be a reduction in work-family conflict. And unfortunately for the U.S., we have a lot of work to do. Starting with policies, right, at the federal and state level of, offering paid parental leave, paid sick leave. These sort of structural factors can be major barriers to individuals trying to, fit both work and family into their life to have a full life. Then looking at the organizations, what are the organizations doing? And not just what policies are on the books, right? But how are they practicing it? What's the culture? So there might be like, oh, yes, you can take time off to, go to this event. But then really everyone else is kind of looking at you and, talking about you under your breath. Or maybe the supervisor is thinking, oh, that person's not that committed. So the cultural piece is really important. If you're interested later, I can tell you about a workplace intervention that I was involved in, specifically targeting work-family conflict. But so there's federal, state, organizational, also thinking about neighborhoods and the kinds of resources that are available. Childcare is a huge issue in the U.S. I don't know about in Australia, but just having available options and ones that are affordable with good quality care. And then there are also things that families can do and their strategies in terms of, maybe we'll probably talk about that later, but supporting one another and kind of fitting each other's schedules in a way that can minimize work-family conflict.
Mm-hmm. So it's definitely multifaceted. It's not just, maybe the individual needs to make changes. It's policy, it's government, but it's also cultural and societal community. Okay, so not something that any one person can fix then.
No, and that's a really important point because the onus is often put on the individual. It's, you made the decision to have a kid, so now you got to figure it out. And they're as planful as people are. And, why shouldn't people be able to have a family and, be productive at work as well? It's just, this sort of stigma and expectation, at least in more individualistic societies of, you got to figure it out, versus having multifaceted, multi-level support, showing that there's a value in family life and that, thinking about at the organizational level, especially that employees are humans, and it's not just what they're, doing at work and, crunching numbers or whatever, but everything about their life and how supportive and fulfilling life outside of work can also benefit work too. But I think really focusing on individuals as humans and giving them the support to thrive in both work and family, I think that's really what it comes down to, those cultural values there.
So unfortunately, so this podcast, I think, focuses on the individual. And I think that changing governmental policies and cultural expectations is it's a bit out of the reach of this particular podcast. But I mean, if anyone is listening and you can vote, I mean, I think that that's one way that we can change things, and having these discussions certainly will help to change some of these things. But I'd also love to know, what are some things that individuals can do to help to, minimize that conflict?
Absolutely. Keeping all that other stuff in mind and context. Certainly there are constraints for individuals, but there are things that individuals can do. One that I'm still trying to get down is establishing a healthy routine for exercise and sleep. There's also research that shows that practicing mindfulness meditation can actually reduce work-family conflict, and that's shown to be effective. Another thing is managing expectations. So from the very beginning, trying to have realistic and achievable expectations versus having this sort of dream or ideal that I can have it all, I can do it all. Depending on how you define that, I think that really doesn't set you up for success. You can be a good parent, you can be a good worker, but what does that mean for you? And that might not necessarily mean filling up your calendar with all these activities, but having, quality time together, eating dinner, and just hanging out, not having to have a jam-packed calendar. And also, at work, what is realistic? Of course, there are these pressures, but knowing your own strengths and areas for growth. What is realistic? Am I going to say I can have this done by tomorrow? Because if that's not realistic, that's definitely going to cause some work-family conflict, right? Because then you might be at home having to work. Another one is creating boundaries. I don't know if you've noticed, some people will have in their emails saying, I'm emailing at a time that is conducive to my work-family fit, but I don't expect you to reply during this time. And I think that's challenging with technology, is that we're just so accessible. So trying to find times where you are available, and then, depending on what your job is, being able to disconnect as much as possible to be as fully present with your family, I think is important. And hopefully you have a culture that will respect that, and having coworkers that, okay, it's after 5. I can't expect that Kelly's going to respond to me until 8 a.m. the next morning. But even for yourself, and these are all things I'm working on too. I'm not an expert. That's why I'm still researching to find out how to reduce it. But I think, creating those boundaries and managing expectations and taking time for self-care and compassion, those would be my recommendations for strategies for an individual to try to reduce their work-family conflict.
I definitely find that I have that problem where, because I work from home most of the time, I can hear my emails going off all times of the night because I interview people from across the world and they're emailing when they're awake. It's not necessarily when I'm awake. I have to remember to close all the windows on my computer so that I can't hear it and I don't feel like going to answer my emails.
Yeah, that's tough. Actually, when after I got my Ph.D. And I was still working at Penn State as a research assistant professor. At that time, we had BlackBerry, so I'm kind of dating myself. But I was managing this project, and I was just constantly on my BlackBerry. I would see the light go off, and I'm like, oh, I have to respond. And it really became a problem because then I get sucked into what was going on there. And, I have my kids here, and it's like, oh my gosh, no, I got to turn this light off. If they really need me, they'll call me. So I've had to do things like that for me, or, not having email notifications on my phone. Like these are things that I've gotten to where I'm like, no, I need to create these boundaries because I know that it could affect me. And then of course affect my family. And, I just have to create those boundaries so I can minimize that.
And so that's some of the things that I think we can do for work, but are there any ways that families can help as well?
Yeah, I think, focusing on partners, with all of these things, I think communication is really important. So being able to express that I have this concern, or I have this need, or I want to share this, I got a promotion, or I had this, really positive experience at work. I felt really like valued, and I felt like I, belonged. And so really, sharing those experiences, as well as like really listening and supporting and trying to empathize with your partner. So there's that emotional support piece, but in terms of instrumental support, it could be just really trying to coordinate. So let's say with childcare schedules, right? So I have to stay late for this event. Can you, pick up the kids on this day? And so it's kind of like this puzzle piece, so to speak. But the extent to which you can sort of chip in and like, we're a team, we're gonna make this happen. And try to make it so that both people can have fulfilling work and family lives.
Okay. And how do gender roles sort of affect this dynamic and work-life balance, or work? What is it? Work-family conflict. Sorry, had a mind blank right there.
No, that's okay. I mean, it affects all of those things. And this was especially evident with the pandemic because we really saw that women suffered significantly more than men in terms of experiencing that work-family conflict. So having to reduce their hours, trying to, be teacher and work at the same time, because there are still those traditional gender norms where the mothers are expected to be the caregiver and the father is supposed to prioritize breadwinning. And that really came to light during the pandemic. And people are still trying to recover from that. If they had to quit a job or reduce hours, those can have long-term ramifications in terms of their careers and income. And so building on that too, thinking about gender norms and how the COVID-19 pandemic really brought it to light, is that there's still this ideal worker image, right? So, and it is the, white male employee essentially who can, not have to be held down by any responsibilities, can be there at the office around the clock whenever is needed. And they're seen as dedicated, whereas women are typically seen as less than committed, are invested in their work just by virtue of being a mom. And women of color are even doubly disadvantaged in relation to this ideal worker image. So although there have been great strides in terms of gender equality and gender equity, the COVID-19 pandemic really put a spotlight on, there's still these traditional gender norms that are shaping experiences, and that's creating a lot of work-family conflict for mothers in particular.
And so I guess some way that we can kind of try to combat that is through what you've said before, communication with your partner, communication with work, having balance, but I guess also just recognizing it more in society, because, I think it's one thing to be in that position, but you can't really change much about it. So it's about, I guess, the societal change, right?
Absolutely. And I've kind of, it's sort of been kind of my mission. I don't know if that's the right word. It sounds maybe more important than it really is. But like recently, I wrote a commentary piece on how work-family conflict is a public health concern. For this very reason, we talk about stress, but we don't explicitly name work-family conflict as this stressor. And so that's something I've been motivated about lately, is to get that term out there, and make it clear that it is an issue that affects individuals as well as their families, and that we need to zero in on that particular stressor and what are the ways that we can reduce it and promote more work-family fit.
Okay, great. So you mentioned previously that you had a little anecdote about a workplace intervention.
Yes, I had the privilege of being a part of this multi-state collaboration that was really multi. And let me start over.
Yeah.
I had the opportunity, the amazing opportunity, to be involved in the first ever intervention focused on reducing work-family conflict. So this was a group initiative called the Work Family Health Network. And we had people from various institutions with coming from disciplines like IO psychology, human development, family studies, and so forth. But essentially, all these different types of expertise came together. And the intervention targeted three things. One was giving employees more control over their schedules. So really thinking about, do we need to have this meeting? Are there ways that employees can figure out when they want to do work, when that's when they're at their best? Also, a huge one is training supervisors to be more supportive of family life. And over and above just general supervisor support, family supportive supervisor behaviors are hugely impactful on work-family conflict and just overall health and well-being. And with those two things, just an overall culture change of, focusing not so much on like the face time emphasis, but are people getting the work done, quality work on time? And so really having this shift. And we did in fact found evidence that it reduced work-family conflict and it improved work performance, individual health, as well as family. So I wrote a paper and it showed that the intervention reducing work-family conflict actually increased daily time between parents and their kids. So really there were benefits for the business, for the individuals and the families. And so I'm just very excited to have been a part of that. And then seeing that there can be a change, we can reduce work-family conflict, and it can have just so many benefits. So thank you for letting me share that.
Yeah, thank you. I was just wondering, so you said that, because we have spoken a bit about what individuals can do, but what can supervisors do to change the culture?
One is sort of practicing what you preach, in a sense. So being a role model. So you say, absolutely, I support, going to family events, leaving work a little early or something like that. But if you never see your supervisor do that, you may question whether or not that's actually okay. So being a role model, and also, asking employees about their families, like, how are the kids doing, that sort of thing, to show, if you genuinely mean it, like how their family is. And also another thing is trying to, be strategic and supporting your employees, how they can manage both work and family. If something comes up, how can they address that conflict? And so really trying to be creative with that. And Leslie Hammer and Ellen Kosick are really the key people there that have been studying that. So I was grateful to be working with them. But, it's being a role model, showing that you genuinely care for others, and trying to figure out a way to make everything work. And you won't always find a solution, but I think it goes a long way just to show that you're trying to figure out strategies to help people manage their work family lives.
Okay, thank you. I think a lot of the advice that you've given it's both easy to implement and also not easy to implement. But I think the only thing you can really do, as you said, is just try and change the culture, and hopefully everything will follow suit.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you. Was there anything that you wanted to discuss that we might have missed?
I think the one thing, and this is something I've been thinking a lot about, is just recognizing that work-family conflict is not the same for everyone. And that may seem, sort of, obvious, but I think often we go to this default. And when I say we, I mean, research, media, whatever, of this sort of default family or person and their experiences with work-family conflict. But there are so many people that don't have, certain occupations that, will allow them to live fulfilling work and family lives, that increase the risk of work-family conflict, or, don't have jobs that give them the benefits where they might be able to take time off. And so it's just really recognizing that there can be multiple barriers and different barriers for individuals and their families. And so I think for research related to work-family conflict to continue to advance is really learning more about these unique experiences of individuals and their families. So there's a real lack of research related to families of color. I'm particularly interested. I wrote a piece with some of my students about how work-family conflict is a racial justice issue, because you can see the structural racism on the work side, thinking about occupational segregation, and on the family side in terms of housing and so forth, and how that can just really increase the rate and severity of work-family conflict. So recognizing things like race and gender and those unique experiences, rather than just sort of, glossing over that. But no, we need to take a deeper look, and there's no one size fits all for a person in terms of reducing work-family conflict. And yeah, I just think the message is that the benefits and barriers are different for everyone. And so trying a way to make them more equal or equitable, I think, is a worthy pursuit.
Mm. If you don't mind, we've talked a little bit about how gender interacts with the work-family conflict.
Mm-hmm.
What can people do in terms of race, and how does race interact? But also, what can we do about reducing that conflict? If that's something that you want to talk about right now, because it's a pretty big topic, and I think we could at most scratch the surface today.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it's definitely something that I'm learning more about. I've just been like ravenous with reading and things like that. But just thinking about the culture, right? If you think about sort of the white modes of operation within an organization, and so there are specific ways that, the way things are done that might not fit with other cultures or other races, but yet they're held to those expectations. Thinking about behavioral work, family conflict, right? The way you dress, or how you have your hair, accepted and respected and valued and revered with your family, but not at work. You're expected to maybe Black women straightening their hair. In the U.S., there's actually petitions for the Crown Act so that employees aren't discriminated based on having their natural hair. So there's some movement there, which is really encouraging. And just thinking from the very beginning, applying for a job, if you have white sounding names, more likely to get an interview than not. And whatever stereotypes people might have about people based on their race can come into play in terms of whether or not they think someone has a strong work ethic, is committed, does quality work, and how those employees, whether or not they feel like they belong or they experience discrimination. So there's a lot to unpack there. I'm just kind of like throwing out a bunch of things. It's just so complicated because it's connected to so many things, from the structural to the individual's experiences. And so that's another one, is just digging into those layers and really seeing, what are the ways that people who are racialized as Black experience work-family conflict? It could be in different ways, and ways that are important for us to understand, and how they might experience discrimination at work and how that could affect their families. So I'll stop rambling.
That's okay. No, it's very interesting. But I haven't prepared for it, so I don't have any questions that I'm thinking of commenting on. But thank you for sharing that. It's very interesting, and I think that at the very least, we've brought something for our listeners to think about, and that I'm going to think about certainly, even if we don't fix it today. So thank you. So we'll move on to the practice habit debrief.
Okay.
So what's a practice that you would recommend to a family to ensure that the work-family fit positively impacts the family?
I was thinking a lot about, what would be like one thing that I would recommend to families. And I would recommend, if it's possible to do it over a family meal, that's wonderful. But having some time dedicated for communication and connection. So whether that's over a family meal or going for a walk, having the opportunity for each person to talk about their day, what were their wins, what are some things that maybe they're stressed about, and listening, empathizing, and then coming together as a team to kind of strategize about, okay, you have this conflict, how might we make that work? And so I really think that open communication and connection is really important. And it's an opportunity for, family members to understand your emotions. Why are you behaving the way that you're behaving? Not having to put on a phony smile, but, letting people know this is what's going on with work, and I really want to be here at this event, but I can't, and just being honest and open and sharing that. And I think communicating those feelings really fosters connection and intimacy with your family. And like I said, it gives an opportunity to, come together as a team and problem solve, which can be a great way to, create family cohesion. And also, I think it's an opportunity for children to learn about, trying to make work and family fit, right? Mm-hmm. And so children can see you modeling how you're trying to manage these things, what works, what doesn't, but also just communicating about the sort of things that you're struggling with or that you found helpful can be something that's meaningful to children, not just to understand where you're coming from, but to also socialize them about what it means to have both work and family roles. And also asking kids about their work experience if they're at that age, right? So what are their work family conflict experiences? We often focus on the parents, but adolescents are working too, and they might be experiencing those conflicts. So having the conversation open to them as well to hear their experiences, I think is really important.
And they can also be balancing that as well with education as well, and having to do homework, work, extracurriculars, family. Seems like teens a lot these days have so much going on. And I'm like, I don't know how to, I can barely do what I'm doing.
Yes, I know, the very packed schedules. And that's another thing as a parent, to say, because I have two daughters and they both love sports. It's like, okay, you each can pick one sport per season, and that's like my max. With trying to work and be there for them. And so, again, that's creating barriers, healthy barriers or boundaries in managing expectations. But yeah, it's exhausting watching them, run around and do schoolwork and everything else. So anyways, we all have things that we're managing, things that are challenging and things that are fulfilling. So
yeah. And how often would you recommend you do, sit down with your family and communicate? Is this maybe, every day, once a week, once a month?
I think every day would be ideal, and it may not look the same every day. So, for example, today has been a long day at work, but I still check in and text my kids, see how they're doing, or, send them a link to something that made me think of them. So it's still a way for us to communicate. It may not be face to face. And typically we try to have family meals together, and we each get an opportunity to, talk about our day. And our family likes to go on walks together too. So then it's doing something active. So yeah, it might look different for different families depending on what their work and family circumstances are. But if there's some way to communicate daily in a meaningful way about what they're experiencing and they're feeling, I think that is ideal to create and maintain that connection and intimacy that's important for family relationships.
And I think it's, barring schedule, it's fairly easy to do at least a little bit of communication. We're not asking you to spend 30 minutes every day having a face-to-face in-depth conversation. Just a text could be enough.
Right.
So thank you. So you've also got a few questions from the audience. How are you feeling?
Let's go for it.
Okay. So we'll move on to the questions from the audience. So we've got just a few today. So our first question is, what can you do to maintain your relationship with your family if you have to work long hours?
That's a good question. Let's see. I think if it's possible, first communicating that here's the situation with these long hours, but then trying to set aside some time to spend together. So it's like, okay, I've got to work these long hours, but let's spend the day together this weekend and do these things. So I think it's communicating and then seeing if there's like a window to spend a block of time together. Otherwise, I think it's finding creative ways to connect, whether it be through social media or texting, or maybe there's other creative ways to share. So at a minimum, doing those things. But at the end of the day, if you can't reduce your work hours and spend time with family face to face, then trying to find things that are meaningful to your family, that maybe it's just sending a meme or something, or some kind of picture or symbol that your other family member will get. And it's like, oh, they're thinking of me, knowing that I have to work long hours and they wish they could be here. So I think those kind of things can be helpful when long work hours are often out of our control.
And what about if your family don't want to spend time with you? I'm thinking about like teenagers.
Oh, goodness. That's a great question. I think if they're, how you spend time together can change, right? And so maybe asking the teenager, what sort of things they'd like to do as a family. And maybe it's still nothing, but still try to reach out and ask. And it's true, as adolescents get older, they tend to spend less time with family. And so it does become more difficult for the entire family unit to be together as kids get older and have, can drive, closer relationships with peers, sports, and so forth. So I think if there's a way that, finding something creative or meaningful at each developmental stage that hopefully makes family time worthwhile. But, your teen still might not want to spend time with you, but maybe asking, what would be a way that they'd like to spend time together rather than this is how we've always spent time together as a family and imposing that.
Okay, so maybe bringing in some adaptation and I guess some choices into the older teenagers as well. Okay, so that's all for our audience questions today. We've also, I think, already done the open mic, so I'll just skip that section if that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So thank you so much for talking to me today. If people want to find out more about you, where can they find you?
So they can email me at kelly.chandler@oregonstate.edu. I am also on Twitter or X or whatever it's called at Kelly D. Chandler.
Yes, I'm not sure what it's called right now, or if it's still going whenever this podcast comes out. Hello from the past. If it still exists and if we're still using it, you can find all of the links for your email and for Twitter on our show notes. Thank you so much for talking to me today.
Thank you so much. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, thank you.
You've been listening to All Together, the Family Science Insights podcast, produced by the Family Science Labs, a division of LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. More episodes are available from 10 life management perspectives and can be found by searching LMSL on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and other podcasting apps available on your devices. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider rating our show, sharing it, and subscribing to our channel, as it helps other people find it so that we can grow and bring you more quality resources. More of our work can be found on our website at fa.lmsl.net, where you can join our movement. I'm Dina Sargent. Thanks for tuning in.